Someone is crazy in love with you. And it's because you did this. Watch before it's too late. I need you to pause for a second and really hear this, because this moment is not random. You didn't just click on this by accident. Something inside you felt pulled here, like a quiet tap on the heart saying, "Listen, this is for you." Right now, there is someone in your life, or someone who recently slipped out of your life, who cannot stop thinking about you. And the reason they are suddenly overwhelmed with feelings they can't explain isn't because you chased them, begged them, or tried harder. It's because you did something very few people ever find the courage to do. You changed. You stopped. You chose yourself. And that shift has completely shaken their world in ways they never expected. Let me tell you a story, and as you listen, you're going to recognize yourself in it. There was a time when you were the one always reaching out, always checking in, always trying to hold the connection together. You gave reassurance when they were unsure, patience when they were distant, and understanding when they were confusing. You were consistent. You were available. You were there even when it hurt. And for a long time, they grew comfortable with that. Not grateful, not careful, just comfortable. They assumed you would always be there, always waiting, always ready to give more even when you were getting less. And then, quietly, something changed inside you. It wasn't dramatic. You didn't announce your exit. You didn't post cryptic messages or demand explanations. You didn't even fully realize it at first. You just got tired of abandoning yourself. You stopped over-explaining. You stopped chasing clarity from someone who kept you confused. You stopped trying to earn a place in someone's life who treated your presence like a guarantee instead of a gift. You got still. And that stillness is what did it. That's what flipped the switch in their heart. You see, people rarely realize what they have when they believe they're in control. When they think your love is endless and unconditional no matter how little effort they give, they stop protecting it. But the moment that energy disappears, the moment you step back and reclaim your power, something primal awakens in them. Suddenly, the silence where your attention used to be feels unbearable. Suddenly, your absence is louder than any argument ever was. They start replaying memories they once took for granted. Your voice. Your laugh. The way you understood them without judgment. The way you stayed when it would have been easier to walk away. Right now, whether they admit it or not, they feel the loss. They might scroll through old messages, hover over your name, and stop themselves from reaching out because deep down they know things aren't the same anymore. Contacting you now would mean facing the truth they avoided for so long. That you were real. That your love was real. And that they didn't handle it with the care it deserved. So instead, they sit with it. The regret. The longing. The sudden realization that you were not just another option, but someone rare. Here's the part you really need to hear. The reason someone is crazy in love with you now is not because you proved your worth to them. It's because you stopped proving it. The moment you stopped fighting to be chosen, you became unforgettable. The moment you stopped pouring into someone who wasn't pouring back, you activated a kind of power that can't be ignored. You reminded them, without saying a word, that your love was a privilege, not an obligation. But listen carefully, because this is important. Just because someone suddenly feels obsessed, emotional, or desperate for your attention does not automatically mean they are ready to love you the right way. Missing you is not the same as being prepared for you. Wanting you back is not the same as being willing to show up consistently, honestly, and fully. Sometimes people only realize the value of something when they lose access to it. And that realization, while intense, does not always come with maturity or change. This is why your silence matters so much right now. This space you've created is doing work that words never could. It's forcing reflection. It's forcing growth. It's forcing them to sit with their choices instead of being rescued from them by your kindness. If you rush back out of guilt, loneliness, or hope without real change, you interrupt a lesson that needs to be learned. You didn't create this distance to punish anyone. You created it to protect yourself. And look at you now. Even if you don't fully see it yet, you're stronger, calmer, more grounded. You don't feel the same anxiety you used to feel waiting for replies or signs. You're beginning to realize that love should not feel like a constant test of endurance. You're learning that the right connection doesn't require you to shrink, wait, or beg. And that growth is exactly why your energy feels different to them. That's why they feel drawn, unsettled, and suddenly awake. There's another truth here that might sting a little, but it will set you free. Not every deep connection is meant to last forever. Some people come into your life to show you how deeply you can love, and then they leave to teach you how deeply you must love yourself. The bond was real. The feelings were real. But that doesn't always mean the future is meant to include them in the same way. Sometimes the purpose of the connection is completed when you finally choose your own peace. If they do come back, if they reach out or try to reopen the door, pay attention to actions, not words. Real change shows up differently. It doesn't rush. It doesn't pressure. It doesn't guilt you into giving access again. It shows consistency, accountability, and effort without being asked. Anything less is just the old cycle trying to repeat itself with new promises. I want you to understand how powerful what you did really is. By stepping back, you showed what unconditional love looks like without self-betrayal. You showed emotional maturity. You showed self-respect. And that energy is magnetic. It doesn't just affect the person you walked away from. It aligns you with something better. Someone who won't need to lose you to see your value. Someone who chooses you clearly, openly, and without hesitation. So if you're feeling a little confused right now, sensing their energy, dreaming about them, or wondering why they suddenly seem so affected, don't doubt yourself. This is a natural response to the shift you made. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't become cold. You simply stopped abandoning yourself. And that choice changed everything. Before this ends, I want you to stay till the end and really let this sink in. You were never hard to love. You were offering depth to someone who didn't know how to swim. Their struggle now is not your responsibility to fix. Your only responsibility is to keep honoring the growth you fought so hard for. Protect your peace. Trust the process. And know that the love meant for you will meet you where you are, not where you used to be. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next.
Click this.
Your
subscribe
support
button.
helps this message reach the people it's meant for. And remember, sometimes the biggest proof of love isn't in how much you give, but in knowing when to stop giving yourself away. I need you to stay with me right now, because what comes next explains why everything feels so intense beneath the surface. Since the moment you stepped back, the energy between you and that person didn't disappear. It transformed. And while you were learning how to breathe again without constantly checking your phone, they were entering a phase of deep emotional unrest. At first, they tried to ignore it. They distracted themselves. They stayed busy. They told themselves they were fine. But silence has a way of stripping away denial. When there is no longer a familiar presence filling the gaps of their day, the mind gets loud. And that's exactly what happened. They began noticing the smallest things reminding them of you. A song. A place. A random moment that should have felt ordinary but suddenly felt heavy. They realized how much of their emotional stability was tied to your consistency. You were the calm they leaned on without acknowledging it. You were the one who made their chaos feel manageable. And now that you're no longer there in the same way, they feel exposed. Unsettled. Forced to face themselves without the comfort of your reassurance. What's important to understand is that this isn't just about romance or attachment. This is about identity. When someone grows used to being loved deeply, they unconsciously begin to define themselves through that love. You reflected back a version of them that felt seen, accepted, and understood. And when that reflection disappeared, they were left alone with parts of themselves they had been avoiding. That's why the feeling is so overwhelming. It's not just missing you. It's missing who they were when they felt safe in your presence. You, on the other hand, have been going through a quieter transformation. While they are restless, you are slowly learning stillness. While they are replaying the past, you are becoming more present with yourself. You may not even realize how much you've changed because growth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just feels like exhaustion lifting. Sometimes it feels like peace replacing anxiety. Sometimes it feels like no longer needing answers that once consumed you. And here's where the story deepens. The universe responds very differently when someone chooses self-respect over emotional survival. The moment you stopped chasing, you shifted the balance. You stopped feeding an uneven dynamic. And that caused a ripple effect. The connection moved from comfort to uncertainty for them. From safety to fear. And fear has a way of revealing feelings people didn't know how to name before. They start asking questions they avoided. Why did I take them for granted? Why did I always assume they'd stay? Why didn't I choose them when they were choosing me? These questions don't come from clarity. They come from loss. And loss is often the first teacher before growth can even begin. You might be sensing this without direct communication. Feeling waves of emotion that don't feel like yours. Sudden thoughts of them out of nowhere. Moments where you feel pulled backward even though you know you've moved forward. That's because emotional bonds don't dissolve instantly. Especially when they were built through vulnerability, patience, and genuine care. But sensing someone doesn't mean you're meant to return to them. It just means the connection mattered. There's something powerful about the way you left space instead of chaos. You didn't burn bridges. You didn't lash out. You didn't try to make them hurt the way you hurt. You walked away with your integrity intact. And that is what makes this so difficult for them. There's no villain version of you to justify their behavior. There's no dramatic ending to blame. Just the quiet truth that they didn't step up when they had the chance. This is often the point where people confuse intensity with destiny. Where sudden emotional urgency feels like love awakening. But intensity born from absence is not the same as love rooted in presence. Love that lasts doesn't need to lose you to recognize you. It recognizes you while you're still there. It protects the connection before it fractures. That's why it's so important that you don't romanticize their struggle. Their pain does not automatically equal readiness. Their longing does not automatically equal change. Growth requires awareness, accountability, and consistent action over time. Not just emotion in the moment. You didn't create this situation by being distant. You created it by being brave. Brave enough to stop pouring into a place that wasn't nourishing you. Brave enough to trust that you deserve clarity instead of confusion. Brave enough to walk away from potential and choose reality. And now, something else is happening that you may not see yet. As they are forced to confront what they lost, you are quietly becoming aligned with what you deserve. The more you stay grounded, the more you attract situations that feel mutual. Balanced. Secure. You may notice people responding to you differently. Respecting your boundaries. Listening more closely. That's not coincidence. That's the result of the internal shift you made. It's natural if part of you still cares. Caring doesn't disappear just because you choose yourself. But caring no longer controls you the way it once did. You're no longer willing to sacrifice your peace for the hope that someone might eventually show up differently. And that is the difference between who you were and who you are becoming. They may reach out eventually. Or they may stay silent, hoping time will soften the truth. Either way, what matters most is that you don't abandon your growth to relieve their discomfort. Their journey is theirs. Yours is unfolding in a new direction. There's a reason this all feels like a turning point. Because it is. Not just in love, but in self-trust. You're learning to listen to yourself. To honor discomfort instead of explaining it away. To walk away when something doesn't feel right, even if you still feel attached. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. And one day, whether it's them or someone entirely new, you'll experience a connection that doesn't require silence to be valued. A love that doesn't wake up only after distance. A presence that doesn't need fear to recognize your worth. And when that happens, you'll look back at this moment and understand why you had to choose yourself first. For now, stay where you are. In this clarity. In this strength. In this becoming. You didn't lose anything real by stepping back. You revealed it. Stay with me, because this is where the story shifts again, quietly but powerfully. After the initial shock settles inside them, after the sleepless nights and the constant replaying of memories, something deeper begins to surface. At first, they thought what they were feeling was just missing you. But as time stretches on, they realize it's something heavier. Something far more uncomfortable. It's the realization that the version of life they were living no longer feels satisfying without you in it. They start noticing how empty certain conversations feel now. How surface-level interactions no longer distract them the way they used to. They laugh, but it doesn't land the same. They go out, but there's a strange hollowness underneath it all. And that's when it hits them. You weren't just someone who cared. You were someone who brought depth into their world. You asked real questions. You listened. You saw through the masks they wore for everyone else. And now, without you there, they're forced to face how rare that really was. This is the phase where regret matures. Not the dramatic kind that shows up in impulsive messages or late-night calls, but the quiet kind that settles into the chest and stays there. They begin to understand that they didn't just lose a relationship or a connection. They lost access to a kind of love that doesn't come around often. The kind that's patient without being weak. Loyal without being controlling. Present without demanding perfection. Meanwhile, something equally important is happening on your side, even if it feels subtle. You're beginning to trust your inner voice again. The one that used to whisper warnings you ignored because you loved deeply and hoped harder. That voice is stronger now. Clearer. You're no longer questioning whether you were asking for too much. You're realizing you were asking the wrong person. There's a strange calm that starts to settle into your days. You may still think about them, but it doesn't derail you anymore. The thoughts pass instead of pulling you under. You no longer feel the urge to check their social media, decode their behavior, or search for signs. And that's when the real shift happens. Because detachment doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you stopped needing. That change in you is felt, even from a distance. People can sense when someone no longer operates from lack. When your energy moves from, "Please choose me," to, "I choose myself," it creates a vacuum. And the people who benefited from your old version feel it the most. They start questioning their patterns. Not just with you, but with others too. They see how often they hesitated when things got real. How they delayed commitment, avoided clarity, and relied on others to stay emotionally available while they stayed emotionally guarded. Losing you forces them to confront these truths, because for once, they can't blame the outcome on chaos or circumstance. They have to look at themselves. This is where confusion often turns into obsession. Not because they suddenly understand love, but because they feel the loss of control. You're no longer predictable. You're no longer waiting. You're no longer filling the space they left empty. And that uncertainty shakes them more than your tears ever did. But here's what you must remember. Someone realizing your value after they lose access to you does not automatically qualify them to return to your life. Awareness is only the first step. Change is a process. And most people don't complete that process unless they truly commit to it, even when no one is watching. You didn't step back to be missed. You stepped back to be whole. That distinction matters. Because if you had stepped back as a strategy, the energy would have been fragile. But you stepped back from exhaustion. From clarity. From finally understanding that love shouldn't feel like self-sacrifice disguised as patience. You may notice now that you're attracting different experiences. Conversations that feel lighter. People who don't leave you guessing. Moments of joy that don't come with anxiety attached. That's not luck. That's alignment. You cleared space by letting go of what was draining you, and now something else has room to enter. And still, there may be moments where you feel a pull backward. That's human. Familiar bonds leave echoes. But every time you resist the urge to return to what hurt you, you strengthen the version of yourself that chose growth. You reinforce the boundary that says, I will not abandon myself again. They are learning too, but their lesson looks different. Their growth, if it happens, will be uncomfortable. It will require humility, accountability, the willingness to face what they avoided. And that work cannot be rushed, and it cannot be done for them. This is why it's so important that you don't confuse timing with fate. Just because someone wakes up emotionally doesn't mean they're ready to walk beside you. Readiness shows up in consistency, not intensity. In actions, not apologies. In effort that doesn't fade once the fear of loss eases. You're no longer here to teach people how to love you. You've graduated from that role. Now, you get to be met, not molded. Chosen, not chased. Valued, not questioned. And one day, you'll notice something surprising. The longing that once felt overwhelming will be replaced with gratitude. Gratitude that you didn't stay stuck. Gratitude that you listened to yourself. Gratitude that you didn't mistake potential for promise. Until then, stay grounded in what you know now. You didn't lose your worth when you walked away. You revealed it. And anyone who truly deserves a place in your life will recognize that without needing silence to teach them. This chapter isn't about endings. It's about evolution. And you're right where you need to be. Stay here with me, because now we're entering the part of the journey that most people never talk about. This is the space after the longing, after the regret, after the emotional noise quiets down just enough for truth to start whispering. This is where separation stops being about missing each other and starts being about facing reality. And for them, this is where things get uncomfortable in a way they can't escape. At this stage, they're no longer just thinking about you emotionally. They're thinking about you practically. They start noticing patterns in their life that didn't bother them before but now feel empty. The way their days lack meaning. The way connections feel shallow. The way no one else quite matches the depth you brought. They begin comparing, even when they don't want to. And every comparison reminds them that what they lost wasn't replaceable. They start realizing that you didn't just love them, you stabilized them. You brought order to their emotional chaos without trying to control it. You were the person they could come to without fear of judgment. And now that safe space is gone. That realization can be terrifying, because it means they can't just distract themselves anymore. They have to sit with who they are without you softening the edges. And this is usually when the internal bargaining begins. They tell themselves stories. Maybe you'll come back. Maybe enough time will pass. Maybe things will reset on their own. But deep down, there's a growing awareness that something fundamental changed when you stepped away. Not just in the relationship, but in you. And they can feel it. You, meanwhile, are experiencing something very different. You're learning how to be with yourself without the constant emotional noise. At first, that silence felt strange. Almost wrong. But now it feels steady. Familiar. You're starting to trust it. You're realizing that peace doesn't have to be earned through endurance. It's allowed to be simple. You may notice that you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to people who misunderstand you. You don't chase conversations that don't flow naturally. You don't panic when someone pulls back. You observe. You assess. And you choose based on how something feels in your body, not how much you want it to work in your head. That shift is everything. Because the version of you that once waited, hoped, and overextended is no longer running the show. And the people who benefited from that version feel the absence sharply. They're not just missing you. They're missing access to the part of you that made their life easier. This is often when guilt sets in for them. Not always the kind they express outwardly, but the kind that lingers. They remember moments where they could have shown up differently. Times they chose comfort over effort. Silence over honesty. They replay those moments now with a clarity they didn't have then. But clarity without action is still just awareness. And this is where your discernment matters most. Because if they reach out during this phase, it may sound sincere, emotional, even convincing. They may finally say the things you waited so long to hear. But words spoken from fear of loss are very different from words spoken from grounded intention. You didn't walk away to hear better apologies. You walked away to live a better life. And that life is beginning to take shape, even if it still feels unfamiliar. You're building a relationship with yourself that doesn't depend on being needed. You're discovering what it feels like to be wanted without being drained. To be valued without being tested. That growth creates a natural boundary. Not a wall, but a filter. And not everyone can pass through it. They may feel drawn to you more than ever now, because your energy is no longer accessible. You're no longer available on demand. You're no longer bending. And that can feel intoxicating to someone who mistook your consistency for permanence. But here's the truth that protects you. Love that is awakened by absence must still be proven by presence. If someone truly grows, it shows in patience. In respect for your pace. In a willingness to rebuild slowly, honestly, and without entitlement. Anything else is just urgency masquerading as love. You're also beginning to notice that your emotional capacity has changed. You no longer want intensity without stability. Chemistry without clarity doesn't excite you the way it used to. You crave alignment, ease, reciprocity. And that's how you know you've evolved. This chapter isn't about waiting for them to change. It's about you continuing to choose yourself even when old feelings resurface. Because growth isn't linear. Memories will come back. Familiar comfort will tempt you. But every time you pause instead of reacting, you reinforce your new foundation. And something powerful happens when you do that. You stop repeating cycles. You stop reopening wounds just to see if they still hurt. You stop confusing attachment with love. They, on the other hand, are standing at a crossroads. They can either do the inner work required to become someone capable of meeting you where you are now, or they can stay stuck longing for a version of you that no longer exists. And that choice is entirely theirs. Your role is not to wait. Not to hope. Not to hold space indefinitely. Your role is to live. And as you do, you'll notice something else shifting. The narrative changes. Instead of wondering why they didn't choose you, you start asking why you stayed as long as you did. Instead of craving validation, you feel appreciation for your resilience. Instead of romanticizing the past, you feel curious about the future. That's not detachment from love. That's maturity. You're no longer available for connections that only work when you overextend. You're no longer interested in being the lesson someone learns after losing you. You're becoming the standard. And whether they rise to meet that standard or fade into the background of your story, you'll be okay. More than okay. You'll be grounded. Whole. Clear. This is the phase where you realize that the biggest transformation didn't happen in them. It happened in you. And that realization is what truly sets you free. Stay present with this moment, because what unfolds next is subtle but deeply transformative. This is the phase where your new way of being begins to solidify, and the world starts responding to you differently. Not loudly, not all at once, but in quiet confirmations that you are no longer who you used to be. You wake up one day and realize you're no longer bracing yourself for disappointment. You're no longer scanning for signs. You're simply living, breathing, and moving forward with a steadiness that once felt impossible. For them, this phase feels very different. The urgency they felt earlier doesn't vanish, but it changes shape. It becomes heavier. More reflective. They start realizing that time didn't bring you back the way they expected. The space you created didn't close. It expanded. And that expansion forces a reckoning. They understand now that whatever version of you they miss is not the version they'll get access to again. That realization can be sobering. They may begin to notice how often they relied on your emotional labor. How you carried conversations, softened conflicts, and made room for their uncertainty. They see now that your presence wasn't passive. It was intentional. And without it, they're forced to confront their own lack of follow-through. This awareness can either mature someone or paralyze them. And you cannot control which path they choose. What you can control is how you respond to your own growth. You're starting to recognize your patterns with compassion instead of shame. You see where you gave too much, where you ignored your intuition, where you waited longer than you should have. But instead of criticizing yourself, you honor that version of you for doing the best they could with what they knew at the time. That self-compassion is powerful. It changes the way you connect moving forward. You no longer rush to fill silence. You don't assume responsibility for other people's emotions. You don't confuse empathy with obligation. And because of that, your nervous system begins to relax. Your body feels safer. Your mind feels clearer. You may notice that when you think about them now, the feeling is different. It's not as sharp. Not as consuming. There's a sense of distance that feels natural rather than forced. You can remember the good without wanting to relive the pain. You can acknowledge the bond without needing to resurrect it. This is the moment where closure happens internally, regardless of whether it happens externally. You stop needing explanations. You stop replaying conversations. You stop waiting for accountability to arrive in the form you imagined. You realize that clarity doesn't always come from dialogue. Sometimes it comes from acceptance. They might still be processing. Still hoping. Still wondering if the door is completely closed. And that uncertainty can be uncomfortable. But it's also fair. Because you didn't leave abruptly. You didn't punish. You simply stepped into alignment with yourself. As you continue forward, you start attracting situations that reflect your new boundaries. People listen when you speak. They respect your time. They don't push against your limits. And when something doesn't feel right, you trust yourself enough to step back without guilt. This doesn't mean you've become hardened. It means you've become selective. There's a difference. You still love deeply. You still care sincerely. But now, your love is rooted in discernment, not self-sacrifice. And that's what makes this chapter so important. Because it teaches you that love doesn't require losing yourself. That connection doesn't have to come with confusion. That consistency is not too much to ask for. For them, this realization may come too late. Or it may come just in time. But either way, your life no longer revolves around that outcome. You're no longer measuring your worth by whether someone finally understands what they lost. You've already understood what you gained. There may still be moments of nostalgia. Moments where you miss the familiarity. That's normal. Familiarity is comforting, even when it's unhealthy. But you no longer confuse comfort with safety. You know the difference now. And because you know the difference, you don't go backward. You're beginning to feel something new take root. Not excitement. Not infatuation. But peace. The kind that doesn't spike or crash. The kind that stays. That peace becomes your compass. It guides your decisions. It tells you when to engage and when to walk away. It reminds you that you don't need to be chosen to be valuable. And as you hold that energy, the universe responds. Opportunities align. Conversations flow. Connections feel mutual. You realize that what you thought was loss was actually release. Release from waiting. Release from guessing. Release from emotional labor that went unseen. You are no longer proving your worth. You are living it. If they reach out now, you'll feel the difference in yourself immediately. You won't rush. You won't react from emotion. You'll listen, observe, and choose based on alignment, not longing. And that's how you know you've truly changed. This phase isn't loud. It's grounded. It's steady. It's you becoming someone who no longer abandons themselves for the sake of being loved. And that is the most powerful transformation of all. Keep going. You're not missing anything behind you. Everything meant for you is unfolding ahead, in the space you were brave enough to create.